I'm Diane. Standing in the midst of the chaos, the housewarming party that was supposed to celebrate my twin sister Emily's new home has turned into a battlefield. The room is filled with stunned silence as my grandmother, Amelia, reveals the truth about the house. The glittery welcome home, Emily banner hangs crookedly, and the balloons seem to mock the false pretense of this gathering. My parents, Richard and Victoria, stand there, their faces a mix of shock and disbelief. Emily, usually so composed, is on the verge of a breakdown. It all started a few months ago. I come from a family where my parents, Richard and Victoria, have always favored Emily. Richard is a 62-year-old retired corporate executive, a man used to getting his way and making decisions without much input from others. Victoria, a 60-year-old former socialite, is more concerned with appearances and keeping up the family image. One Friday evening in April, we were sitting at the family's antique dining table. This table has been the stage for every important family announcement since I was 7. Richard stood at the head of the table, his authoritative presence filling the room. Victoria sat beside him, her hands neatly folded, wearing a smile that seemed more like a mask. Richard cleared his throat and said, "We've decided to give you girls a head start in life." He slid 2 envelopes across the table, one thick and one thin. Emily opened hers first. Inside was a shiny key and a lease agreement for a luxurious penthouse in the city center, worth around $500,000. She let out a shriek of excitement, and Victoria pulled her into a tight hug. The room was filled with their laughter. I opened my envelope to find a rusty key and a piece of paper with an address in the countryside. I looked at Richard, confused. "What is this?" I asked. He replied dismissively, "It needs some work, but you're good with your hands." That was all the explanation I got. No hug, no words of encouragement. Emily tilted her head and said, "At least you got something, Diane." But I could see the satisfaction in the corner of her mouth. The next morning, I drove for 50 minutes to the address on the paper. When I saw the house, I was in shock. The roof was caving in on one side, the windows were broken, and the porch steps were on the verge of collapse. The yard was overgrown with weeds, and the smell of mildew and rot hit me as soon as I got out of the car. I sat on the porch and called my friend, Ryan, a 32-year-old real estate lawyer. He's been my friend since college, the kind of guy who's always there when you need him. "How bad is it?" he asked. I told him about the roof, the wiring, and the lack of running water. He was silent for a moment and then asked, "Do you want me to look at the deed?" I said, "Not yet. I just need a minute." He gave me a few minutes to collect myself. That night, I sat in my truck and calculated the cost of renovating the house. The estimate came to $45,000, but I only had $15,000 in my savings. I knew I had to do as much work as I could myself. I'm a carpenter and a furniture restorer. I've been working with wood since I was 17, but my family has never really considered it a proper career. Over the next few weeks, I started the renovation. I tore out the rotted kitchen floor, hauled debris to a dumpster, and began installing new drywall and floors. A neighbor, Mrs. Jenkins, an 80-year-old woman with a kind heart, noticed my hard work. She brought me a glass of lemonade one day and said, "This land used to belong to Amelia." "Is she your grandma?" I was surprised and asked how she knew. She said she'd lived there for 40 years and knew who owned what. 6 weeks into the renovation, my savings were gone. I'd built custom cabinets, fixed the roof, and painted the walls. But the electrical system was a major problem. The old wiring was from the 1950s, and I needed a licensed electrician, which would cost me $4,000 to $6,000 that I didn't have. So, I installed temporary wiring for now. One day, Richard showed up unannounced. He walked through the house, inspecting everything. He ran his finger along the mantel I'd restored and opened a cabinet door. After a long minute, he said, "Not bad. But don't get too attached." His words made my stomach sink. A few days later, I went to Emily's penthouse to pick up a tool I'd lent her. Outside her door were a dozen expensive shopping bags. I knocked, but she said she was busy and couldn't come to the door. Through the gap under the door, I could see the TV on, and I heard her on the phone, whispering, "Mom, I just need a little more time. The credit card company keeps calling." I realized then that Emily was in financial trouble. But I kept quiet. I'd learned long ago that in this family, the truth only matters when it comes from the right daughter. When I was 18, I caught Emily stealing money from Amelia's purse. I told Richard, but he didn't believe me. He said I was making up stories. 10 weeks after I started the renovation, the house was almost unrecognizable. I posted some before and after photos on social media, and the response was amazing. People were impressed by what I'd done with my own hands. Then, one Thursday evening, Richard and Victoria showed up at my house. Richard stood in the middle of the living room and said, "Your mother and I have been talking. Emily needs this house. Her penthouse had some complications, and she can't stay there anymore. The deed is still in my name, Diane. You have 48 hours to move out." I was in shock. I'd put my heart and soul into this house. I said, "I need to make a phone call." That night, I called Ryan. I told him everything. He asked if the deed was in Richard's name, and I said he'd never let me see the paperwork. He then asked if I'd ever received a notarized transfer document, and I said no. He told me there were two major problems. First, there was no proper documentation of the transfer. Second, he asked who actually owned the land. I remembered Mrs. Jenkins' words about Amelia. I told Ryan that my neighbor said the land used to belong to my grandmother. Ryan said, "Give me 24 hours. Don't sign anything, don't move anything, and don't respond to your father." I agreed. Over the next few hours, my phone was flooded with messages from my family. Victoria texted, "Please don't do this to our family. Just let Emily have the house. We'll make it up to you." Emily called, saying, "Diane, I really need this. I'm in a bad place right now." Even my aunt and cousins got involved, telling me I was being selfish. Richard called and said, "If you fight this, you won't just lose the house. You'll lose your family." I didn't respond. I was done being the easy one. Then, I got a message in the family group chat. My aunt, who meant to text Victoria privately, sent a message saying that Emily owed over $80,000 in credit card debt and that Richard didn't know yet. I took a screenshot. The next day, Ryan called and told me that the land was held in a revocable living trust established by Amelia in 2015. The sole beneficiary of the trust was me. I was in disbelief. I called Amelia, and she told me that she'd set up the trust for me because she'd seen how I was treated in the family. The following day, Victoria was planning a housewarming party for Emily at my house. She'd invited 20 people and was telling everyone that I'd agreed to give the house to Emily. My aunt called and warned me. I called Ryan, and he said he'd be there, and so would Amelia. Amelia, who is 85 years old and has a bad hip, was already on her way from 4 hours away. When I arrived at my house for the so-called housewarming party, it was filled with people. Emily was in the center of the living room, looking happy, with Richard's hand on her shoulder. Everyone turned to look at me when I walked in. Victoria handed me a glass of lemonade and said, "Be gracious, honey. This is hard for all of us." Great Aunt Margaret, Richard's older sister, patted my arm and said, "Such a generous thing you did, Diane, giving your sister this beautiful house." I replied, "I didn't give anyone anything." Emily followed me into the kitchen. When we were alone, she said, "You should thank me. You'd still be in that small workshop if it wasn't for me." I was furious. I said, "I built this kitchen with my own hands, Emily. These cabinets, this island, they're mine." She just shrugged and said, "That's how it works in this family, Diane. I thought you understood that by now." As Richard was making a toast to Emily's new home, there was a knock at the door. I opened it to see Ryan, in a sharp suit, with a briefcase. Behind him was Amelia, walking slowly with a cane. Richard frowned and asked, "Who invited you?" Ryan stepped inside and said, "No one. I'm Diane's legal counsel." Richard said, "This is a family matter. She doesn't need a lawyer." Ryan replied, "Property transfer is a legal matter." Amelia walked in and looked around the room. She then looked at Richard and said, "Gerald, whose land do you think this is?" Ryan opened his briefcase and showed everyone the trust deed. He explained that the land and the house were held in the trust and that I was the sole beneficiary. He also showed all the building permits and receipts in my name. The room was in shock. Emily started to panic and said, "I need this house. I don't have anywhere else to go." Richard was stunned when he learned that Emily had lost the penthouse due to unpaid debts. The party quickly turned into a disaster. People started leaving, and Richard and Victoria were left speechless. Ryan gave Richard a cease and desist letter, stating that he couldn't enter the property without my written consent. That evening, I changed the locks on the front door. Mrs. Jenkins came over with a bouquet of flowers and said, "I always knew this house was yours, Diane." Over the next few weeks, the fallout from the party continued. Great Aunt Margaret stopped talking to Richard. Emily started getting calls from collection agencies. Richard's position as an honorary advisor at his club quietly disappeared. I received an email from a reporter at a home improvement magazine who wanted to feature my renovation. They published an article about how I'd rebuilt the house with my own hands. I got several custom furniture commissions, and my workshop, Diane's Woodworks, finally got some recognition. A few weeks later, Emily came to my house. She looked tired and defeated. She said, "I'm not here to ask for the house. I don't know how to fix my life. I owe $80,000, and I can't sleep at night." I told her, "I can't fix that for you, but I can give you the number of a financial counselor Ryan knows. The rest is up to you." She nodded and handed me a small box. She said, "I'm sorry for everything." Inside the box were 2 silver bracelets that Amelia had given us when we were 10. Emily had kept both for 15 years. A week after Amelia left, I sat at my desk and wrote an email to my parents. I said, "I love you, but I will not accept being treated as less than. If you want a relationship with me, it has to be based on respect." I hit send and waited. I don't know what the future holds for my family, but I know that I've learned to stand up for myself. The house was never just a house, it was a symbol of my journey to self-worth. I've stopped waiting for my family to see my value and started building it for myself. Now, as I sit in my living room, looking at the walls I built and the floors I installed, I realize that I'm the one who decides what this house means. And I'm ready to face whatever comes next.